Bring in Miles Taylor, former Homeland Security Chief of Staff, Democratic strategist Jenna Arnold, and MS Now political analyst Alexi McCammond. I mean, I'm still thinking it's extraordinary that had to be clarified. But Miles, you've got personal experience with being publicly threatened by the president. What emotions does this trigger for you? And what are these targets and their families going through right now?
Well, the threats are very, very real, Alex, and I'm certainly not comforted by the fact that the White House has walked it back from hanging these members of Congress to only putting them in prison. That doesn't give me a lot of comfort. And, as I've said to folks before, when Donald Trump accuses someone of sedition and treason, even if he's not serious about those words, his supporters are serious about those words, and they make sure of it. They make sure to threaten you, to dox you, to put your family in danger. That's exactly what happened to us. And then often the blast radius is often beyond just you yourself, and it becomes your family members and friends. I've had my wife threatened. I've had my 1-year-old daughter threatened because I simply exercised my First Amendment rights to speak out against this president. But Alex, this also leads me to the core of what these Democratic lawmakers were saying was not that that people in the military should disobey the lawful orders of the commander-in-chief. They should disobey the illegal orders. It's right. And it strikes me, Alex, that within 48 hours of Donald Trump first coming out and condemning them, a judge found those troop deployments in D.C. to be illegal. Military lawyers thought the boat strikes were illegal in the Caribbean. There was a probe into illegal mortgage inquiries in the Trump administration. A judge resumed probes of illegal ICE flights. And then to top it all off, a study showed that the Justice Department has illegally defied the courts 26 times in this administration. That's just a sample within 48 hours of the illegal things that this administration is requiring people to do.
Miles, I want to ask you about what you heard from Scott Bessent there, not far from the president's message. But first of all, what do you think of the original video? Should it have been produced? And second, Bessent's position may not surprise you, but how should GOP Congress members be reacting? Because some are not directly condemning his words.
Look, they should be condemning his words. And what I would say to the Treasury Secretary, if he wants sources of people who will say that Donald Trump has ordered them to do illegal things, all he needs to look at is his predecessors, the former White House Chief of Staff, Donald Trump's former Secretary of State, his former Secretary of Defense, his former Attorney General, his former National Security Advisor, his former Secretary of Homeland Security, his former White House Comms Director. I could go on. These are people who have publicly disclosed that Donald Trump asked them to do, at best, immoral things, and in many cases, things that would have been illegal if they had carried them forward. There is a long history. I would be very surprised if the Treasury Secretary himself hasn't been asked to do illegal things. So my concern is less so these Democratic members retracting the video. In fact, I think they should stand by the video. And it's more the threats of intimidation against whistleblowers in this administration, because we need people to come forward and expose wrongdoing and misconduct. And this administration has made it more dangerous. And so, Alex, it's why this week we responded at defiance.org with emergency grants to provide legal aid to whistleblowers who are willing to come forward and expose presidential misconduct.
So, Jenna, the president was rage posting about this overnight, and here's how he responded when a friendly Fox interviewer extended an off-ramp. Let's listen to it.
In the old days, if you said a thing like that, that was punishable by death.
Yeah, but you're not threatening them. A lot of people are interpreting there's a threat and there's security.
Well, I'm not threatening them, but I think they're in serious trouble. I would say they're in serious trouble. I'm not threatening death, but I think they're in serious trouble. In the old days, it was death.
How do you interpret that?
I'm as uncomfortable with it as you are, but I've been this uncomfortable with that man for 14 years, just like you. And what I see here is what Trump is really saying with these threats is that I'm scared you're not afraid of me anymore. And I do think what we all have to prepare for is that this is likely going to escalate, that this will continue to be his normalized strategy. As a former first grade teacher, the best job I have ever had, I have watched plenty of first grade bullies on the playground tell their peers that the only way that you can be protected is via me. And it's he or those bullies start to lose power when those other students realize that the best way that they can protect themselves is when they band together. And Trump is watching the courts say no. He's watching his military say that they can say no if something's unconstitutional. Communities are proving to him that they don't need him anymore. Lindsey Graham is turning on him. And this is one of those, I continue to think, gosh, the last thrashes of a dying shark are always the strongest. And like, what are those going to be? But I still think we have a lot more coming. And this is why it's so important that we break the cycle, that any sort of strong man theory that a single man can protect us is outdated and wrong. And it's actually your community that's going to be in your best interest.
Alexi, I want you to weigh on this as well. In this regard, Trump cannot possibly know or not think that what he says doesn't have an effect like this. So this plausible deniability, like, no, I'm not calling for their execution, but they're going to be in trouble. I mean, he's got to know what happens to people.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. And also, it's just interesting considering this is happening 3 months after the horrific murder of Charlie Kirk, which, as far as we know, was not totally politically motivated and was certainly not orchestrated by Democrats or Democrats' rhetoric. But after that, a lot of Republicans, including the president, said things to the effect of, well, Democrats and their rhetoric are leading to more political violence. They have been aware of how, allegedly, they say, rhetoric leads to violence. And it is really striking to see the president retweeting these things or resharing these things, posting these things himself, walking it back halfway, kind of to your point, but sort of just leaving the larger threat hanging out in the air for his supporters to, interpret on their own. So it's almost as if he creates a permission structure for people to really just interpret those things and act on them or not, or take them to mean something that he says they don't. And it's really scary because, he has a huge platform and a lot of influence over how people feel. And people are already angry, polarized. They don't like members of Congress. They don't trust the government. They're conspiratorial. They don't need added flames to the fire that already exists for a lot of folks.
So, Miles, best guess just why he didn't take the off-ramp that he was offered there in that interview. And what do you think his strategy is? Why make these outlandish comments? Because he knows they're going to be controversial.
Well, because the intimidation works, Alex, and he doesn't want to lose the power from that intimidation. He thinks intimidation is why he's been able to prevent people in this current administration from speaking out against them. I mean, that laundry list I went through earlier of former cabinet members in his administration, that's one of his biggest fears, is having people go expose who he is to the public. He wants to intimidate them. It's why right out of the gate, he came out and ordered me investigated and likewise said I was guilty of treason, is he wanted to send a message to potential whistleblowers in his administration. Do not think about coming forward and exposing that misconduct. And the only way, Alex, we can counter that is that we've got to show people who would speak out, who would expose illegal activity, that they will be defended on the other side. They will have support. They will not wind up in prison for coming forward and telling the truth and exposing things that are unlawful. That's really, really important to do. I mean, I mentioned what we've done over at Defiance.org and with other groups to try to do that, but there's a much bigger whole of society need to say, we will stand behind truth tellers who come forward to expose illegal activity. And look, I'd say if just one person, if just I have like a half dozen anecdotes of times Donald Trump directed me specifically to do things that would have been illegal, you got to think that that full list is much, much, much longer.
Yeah. Here's how Democrats hit back after Trump's threats. Let's watch this.
Simply and clearly stating what the law says, what the Uniform Code of Military Justice says, it's not a crime.
Very clearly, Donald Trump is trying to intimidate and make us afraid so we won't stand up and fight for the Constitution and the rule of law.
Words have consequences, and this president has made my point, has made our point why we made this video.
He is lighting a match in a country soaked with political gasoline.
So reaction from both of you, Alexi and Jenna. Let's start with you, Alexi. Do you think Democrats could have expected this response from Trump, this talk of death, of execution? Or do you think that they're even surprised he takes it to this level?
I mean, I think that it's a little surprising, and I think certainly most people expect a lot more of the president of the United States than to talk like this and make threats like this, however serious or not he claims to be. No normal or sane person, let alone president of the country, talks about this at a time when, again, there has been rampant political violence on both sides of the aisle. People are already conspiratorial, worked up, and nothing is really coming to them to calm them down. And so, yeah, I think it's surprising to Democrats, and they've had to ramp up their security because it's led to more threats and calls to their office from people who are upset because of what the president said.
Last word to you, Jenna.
I'm chuckling at Schumer's comment. It feels very ChatGPT, but he certainly delivered it with some drama. I would say that I disagree. I think this is predictable. I don't think this is going to decrease anywhere. And I echo the sentiment of my fellow panelists who suggest that this gives people out in the rest of the world permission to behave like that. And this is what a lot of the world looks like. Yeah. You have folks and strongmen and men in particular who believe that they can leverage and weaponize their positions of power and language to keep people in order. And it is why we have an opportunity to raise a new generation of primarily boys that understand that community is actually the strongest and safest place